Um, okay, tonight's share is sponsored by the Lindinsky and Friedman families. Nishmas Leah, Rivka, Bas, Alav Shalom, Basar Mordechai, Hakai, and Quinn. Misham Shav and Aliyah. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I said we're going to talk about the Mekoshesh tonight, the story of the Mekoshesh with the Chassidishe twist. I want to start with maybe a shocking psak that I heard B'Shem Yitzchak Zilberstein. I didn't find it like in his Sefer Lahedya, but I heard it B'Shmai, and I want to frame it like that. Today, this is not so common. Let me tell you a story. Everyone in here has been to Kikar Shabbos in Yerushalayim, right? Do you know how it got that name? It's a Kikar so you're a little older. And it's a Kikar that is in the, today it's in the center of Haredi Yerushalayim. Now you have to wind back the clock to the 1950s, 48, 49, 50. And keep in mind, Yerushalayim was tiny compared to what we know now. All the extra parts of Yerushalayim did not exist. Pasha didn't exist. Yerushalayim ended at the end of Malchi Yisrael, Pachas Yisrael, It was the old city, which by the end of the war in 1948 did not belong to Israel anymore. It was controlled by the Jordanians, by the Jordanian Legion. Mamila Mall was no man's land, full of barbed wires and mines. Some of the famous landmarks that everyone's been to, that everyone knows about, Pasha didn't exist. And Shamgar, which is down Malchi Yisrael, which is today some of the most beautiful real estate in Yerushalayim, together with Gera Beis Medrash. Gera Chassid would say that's the same thing. But it's one of the most highly developed and beautiful areas of Yerushalayim, was the primary military base of the IDF, of the Haganah at that point, in Jerusalem. Now, during 1948 and 1949, as the frontline battles were by the old city, the IDF would come through Mei Sha'arim, down Rechav Mei Sha'arim with their trucks, every single day, dozens, maybe hundreds of times. That was the main route to get back and forth to Yerushalayim. Now, when the war started winding down in 1949, so many of the people who lived in Mei Sha'arim, the Haredim, started petitioning that they want the trucks from the IDF to stop driving through the neighborhood on Shabbos. You have to imagine an old World War II Shirayim diesel truck, which is what they were driving. Big, heavy, leftovers from Eastern European countries from World War II, rumbling through the streets of Yerushalayim, and they wanted it to stop. Obviously, they were not interested in stopping, and that led to some of the first Shabbos rallies, Shabbos protests, which still happen in Yerushalayim today, different places, different areas, and it was a very contentious, few months as they protested for Shabbos, ad kidei kach that the name Kikar Shabbat stuck, because it was the Kikar where they always made the protest for Shabbos. It was where everyone would end up, and there's many, many stories of truck drivers getting pulled out of their trucks and harangued, and everything that would be familiar today was happening back then. To Enkel Chadash Tachas Hashemesh, and depends who you ask, depends what the story was, and depends who started up with who, and Mamash Enkel Chadash Tachas Hashemesh. Now, at some point there was major protest there, and a person was even killed. There was one of the first reckonings that the Israeli police had to do with itself was when a person was killed at a protest there. They obviously the investigation found them to be guilt-free, but it's a major controversy. It lives on in Israeli history. And then over time, this progressed again and again. In Tel Aviv, there was such a story, and in the early 1950s, Tnuva, which everyone knows in Israel, all the milk and cheese, Tnuva, the main Tnuva factory, the dairy, was down Rechav Yecheskel. It's long gone, again, beautiful real estate by now, but all the trucks from the Moshavim that surrounded Yerushalayim, where they had dairy, would bring them in on Shabbos afternoon, was already the time that they would start bringing the milk, and this is in the 50s. Now, obviously, this is already after there was protests for Shabbos, and people very desperately did not want it to be there. So what these Moshavim that were, at that point, militantly religious would do is they would bring a milk truck, the driver, and then on the back, holding on like the garbage man in the back, you'd have 4 or 5 strapping youths from the Moshav who would come, and it was like your own security detail. And when invariably the truck would get stopped in Kikar Shabbos on its way to Yecheskel, these guys would jump off and start cracking heads and get through it. This was the weekly, until ultimately the street was closed for Shabbos. It made it all the way to the Bagatz, to the Israeli Supreme Court, who ruled that it was not coercion of religion, and they allowed the minhag to continue. And there's many, many more times when the highway by Ramot was opened up, like in 1978. It was a tremendous protest. 15,000 people showed up on a Shabbos there. And again, the Fraya who lived in Ramot came to counter-protest by it. Now, here's the psak that was startling to me. I saw a psak B'Shem Yitzchak Zilberstein, that these, let's say, teens who come on the back of a milk truck to counter-protest the protesters of Chillul Shabbos are not being Mechal Shabbos by going on the truck and doing this. Why? Because the Malacha Shein Tzricha L'Gufa. They don't care to be Mechal. They're not trying. There's no Malachas Machshavas. They're not trying to be Mechal Shabbos. They just want to make a point. They want to like protest your protest of their Chillul Shabbos, but that's not a Malachas Machshavas, and it wouldn't be Chillul Shabbos. Maybe not Chillul Shabbos Deiraisa. Certainly not Mutter, but maybe it wouldn't be Chillul Shabbos Deiraisa. This is what Rizal suggested.
Hanging on the back?
Whatever Yisurim is Karuch and what they're doing, all the Chillul Shabbos that they're doing to make this protest is Malach Shem Tzrich L'Gufa. They would be happy to be at home in the Moshav, reading a book in a hammock, and Sabrente, their Indian to come protest your protest. So it's Malach Shem Tzrich L'Gufa. This is what Rizal said. It's a very interesting machshava, and you'll see how it ties into the Mekoshesh. But to start with that, I think it's an interesting machshava. Now let's talk about the Mekoshesh. Now the Mekoshesh is infamous. I wouldn't say famous, he's infamous. In the end of this sixth parsha, he's the first Mechal Shabbos in Klal Yisrael's history, and he's, according to some, and we'll get into this, Mechal Shabbos for Hesya. Now Mechal Shabbos for Hesya, the Rambam famously in Hilchos Avodah Zarah, I think, writes, and Mechal Shabbos for Hesya is Ki'ilu Oved Avodah Zarah, and he's Kegoy Gamor, and throw the book at him. Mechal Shabbos for Hesya is mamish the lowest of the low. Now, what exactly the source for that Rambam's psak is a Big Nidin, the Netziv, in his sefer on Sifri, I think, brings from his Einikl of Chaim Soloveitchik, which is rare. The Netziv doesn't often quote, it's 2 generations later, he quotes Chaim Soloveitchik with a makar, different makaris that are given, but in any case, Mechal Shabbos for Hesya is considered mamish the lowest of the low. He's like Oisiyid. Now, there's many different shilas that the Poskim handle. Obviously, the primary shayla that everybody's familiar with is Tinag Shenishbu B'Zman Hazeh. Do they have the din of Mechal Shabbos V'Hasya? What would be the rule with that? How many times does a person have to be Mechal Shabbos V'Hasya in order to be called Mechal Shabbos V'Hasya? Mekoshesh did it one time. How many times does a person have to do it? Does it have to be Nissa D'Oraisa or even Nissa D'Rabbanan? Let's say a guy doesn't know the chumrah of it. He thinks he's not a Tinag Shenishbu, but he just thinks that this is a chumrah. This is some sort of extra credit. He doesn't really know how chumrah it is. Or let's say a guy, I remember when in Manhattan Beach when my father was a Rav, there was a guy at the end of the block, a big, hulking, like a Russian, like Georgian, like not from the state of Georgia, but Georgia, the country. And he knew as much about Yiddishkeit as I know about being an astronaut. He was like, came from the former Soviet Union, he had no shaykhs. He was an avid smoker. On a regular weekday, you could see him outside in his front porch. His wife didn't let him smoke inside. He was terrified of her. And he smoked outside 2 or 3 packs a day, like a real large amount. And on Shabbos, obviously also he would smoke his regular intake. But when we walked to shul every time, as he saw you coming down the block, as he saw anyone who looked from coming down the block, a cigarette would go behind his back like a kid in school. The guy was like 6'5", standing in front of like a huge hulking man. Cigarette would slip behind his back like he was busted. So is that guy Mechal Shabbos for Hesya, or does he at least have the decency to realize he knows somewhere in the recesses of his mind, even though he doesn't begin to chalam the chaymer hadvarim, he can't really wrap his head around the chaymer hadvarim, but he's, and there's so many different chalices, and that's not really the shmuz that I want to talk about today, all the Pesach should read about what exactly constitutes Mechal Shabbos for Hesya. But in any case, suffice to say that Mechal Shabbos for Hesya is considered the highest level of avarian. That's someone who's mamish, considered like a guy. And the Mekoshesh, at least at face value, is the first Mechal Shabbos for Hesya in Klal Yisrael's history. So that's known for infamy. The Mekoshesh is not someone that we're proud of. He's from the first Mechal Shabbos for Hesya in Klal Yisrael's history. Now, the truth is that Chazal in the Gemara in Baba Basra make this point, and they say as follows. It says like this. The Gemara says a few different things. It says, Yedeya haya Moshe Rabbeinu Shamakoshesh b'misa. Jumping right into the nuts and bolts of it, which we didn't even tell the story yet. But Yedeya haya Moshe Rabbeinu Shamakoshesh b'misa. Moshe Rabbeinu was really aware of the halacha that the Mekoshesh needed to be killed. Shenemar mechalaleh amois yumas. Avaloy Yedeya be'eze misa hu yamas. He didn't know which misa to kill him with. Should it be chanek? Should it be skila? He didn't know which misa to give it to him. V'ruuya ha'isa parshas Mekoshesh shedikasav ha'idei Moshe. The parshas Mekoshesh should have been written ha'idei Moshe Rabbeinu. It should have been a Torah in the Parsha, like a Parsha in the Torah, like anything else. Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, kach v'kach is the halacha. Moshe Rabbeinu records it, passes it on. It should have been regular. The Mekoshesh was vilified. He was nischayev, and it was written al yadai l'lamedcha to teach you shemegalgal and schus al yadei zakav v'chayv al yadei chayev. So chayv al yadei chayev says the Rashbam Mekoshesh. Meaning the Mekoshesh is a bad guy. The Gemara says he was an Eiver Avera, and he was a guy who was Mechal Shabbos for Hesya, and that's why the Parsha was written al yadai to highlight him. Now Taisvis in Babas over here brings something interesting, and this is the part that I want to open up. Taisvis says like this. Nira l'Rashba, the Savala command the Amar Tzlafcha the Hainu Mekoshesh. Taisvis says, and this is on a later Gemara, that this sugya seems to be going like the Mount Amr that says that the Mekoshesh was Slavchad. Now Slavchad we know about his daughters. Slavchad had only girls. He died, and his daughters came to Moshe Rabbeinu to get Yerusha, right? So this is we're going to see the Machlekes in the Gemara on Shabbos, but nearer that this man holds that the Mekoshesh was Slavchad. And the story of the Mekoshesh transpired right in the beginning of the 40 years in the Midbar, right after the story of the Meraglim. The Amr b'Medrash, Taisus brings from a Medrash, the L'Shem Shemayim Nischaven. The Mekoshesh was doing this Lishma. This Aveira, this Chillul Shabbos B'Farhasi, which is the highest level of Aveira, the Mekoshesh was doing it intentionally. Shayu Oimrim Yisrael, Klal Yisrael was dejected, and they were saying, Kivan Shenigzer Aleinu Shalid L'Kanas La'aretz. Since it was Nigzer on us that we're not going into Eretz Yisrael, we're going to stay in the Midbar for 40 years, and we know that meant that this whole dar was going to die, right? This whole dar was going to pass away, they weren't going to make it to Eretz Yisrael. We're not mechuyav b'mitzvahs. Well, we're not mechuyav b'mitzvahs anymore, we're dead, it's over. This is not what, now there's many ways to read this, they were either defiant or dejected, but defiance is usually also stemming from dejection. They were dejected, they didn't see a mission, they didn't see a roadmap for them to have in the Midbar anymore. Shovin mechayav b'mitzvahs. Amad v'chilul Shabbos. So the Mekoshesh stood up and was b'chal Shabbos. Kadesh yaharig. So he should be killed. The yira acherim and other people should see. V'leinasu at sefer ba'am shana kedemut fun. That is this. So this brings this thing that the Medrash says that the Mekoshesh was b'chal Shabbos on purpose to show to Klal Yisrael that we still have mitzvahs, we still have a Torah, and if we don't keep it, we're going to be chayav misa. I want to read you the Targum Yonason on the pasuk. Targum Yonason says like this: it says, "V'hayu b'nei Yisrael sharim b'midbara." Klal Yisrael was shari in the midbar. Gzevish Shabbat l'shtamud l'hayin. B'ram knasa the Shabbat l'shtamud l'hayin. Now the Targum Yonason says it's a little different. They knew that Shabbos was chamor, but they didn't know what exactly the inish was, what exactly the severity of Shabbos is. Kam gavrim midabeis Yosef. Now that means that the Targum Yonason is learning that it's Slavchad, because Slavchad was an anikel of Menashe, who's from Yosef's family. So without saying his name, the Targum says, "Come gavrim midabeis Yosef." Amr b'meimra ezel ve'itlish kisin b'yom Shabbata. I'll go do the malach of Klisha, which again the Targum Yonason is taking aside in a three-way machlekes in the Gemara on Shabbos, which we'll see in a second. The Shabbata v'yechman yas sahada v'yetnan l'Moshe Edim saw him and went to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Yitva Olfam in Kadam Hashem v'Yedin Yasi, and Moshe, this is all in his plan. Edom will see me, they'll go to Moshe, Moshe will ask, Moshe will find out, and then he'll give me the punishment. And Kachave, like he planned, Edom found him, they went to Moshe Rabbeinu, and the Sifri tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu had a Vada Shabbos, very much like what in Yerushalayim, like guarding, and they found him, Ergitzvu, being Mechal Shabbos, and they brought him and they sentenced him. So Tosfos in Baba Basra and the Targum Yonason are saying that the Mekoshesh had the loftiest of ideals. He was trying to make L'Shem Shemayim, to teach Klal Yisrael that Shabbos is very chomer. Now here's the Chassidishe part of the story. There's a vertel here from the Emrei Emes, B'Shem the Kotzker, actually B'Shem Rabbinim, Pshischa, that I always love. I think I said over a similar vart. You'll probably remember it, but I'm going to repeat it anyhow. But he says as follows: the story, the Emrei Emes brings down like the whole background. The Emrei Emes was once sitting around. He was sitting with the Chassidim during World War I in Atvatsk, and he was telling them a member from the Kotzke. And the Kotzke said like this, I'll say it in Yiddish, but he says, "Men fühlt sich as a ganze Woche mit Postake, se kommt Shabbos, tut man sich an der schwarze Kapotte mit dem schwarzen Gartlach und mit dem schwarzen Steimel, ist man schon am Chutten mit dem L'chadoidi." The Kotzke said, the whole week you're in your work clothing, you're doing whatever the whole week. Come Shabbos, you put on your schwarze Bekeshe, your schwarze Streimel with your schwarze, Gartel, and now you b'shenem mechutten mit the Chadaydi. If you go to the whole week like a Shegetz Shabbos or a Shegetz also. This is what the Kotzke was saying. Now the Kotzke, as everyone knows, Manda, very lofty, very honest, really very honest, introspective assessment of a person's own actions. No fluff. And then the Kotzke said, like, if you're a payah the whole week, you're a payah on Shabbos. You're not like, this is what the Emrei Emes said this over to the Chassidim, and he said, "Ich zag." I'm sorry. The Kotzke said, "Ich zag kemasei b'chol kach masei b'Shabbos." Meaning, it was a rhetorical question. You think you're a whole guy? No, kemasei b'chol kach masei b'Shabbos. Whatever you are during the week is what you are on Shabbos. Now the Emrei Emes told the Chassidim after that, he said as follows. He said, "But I want to tell you of a vertel from Rabbinim B'Shischa, who's actually the Kotzke's Rebbe. That's a little different twist." And the Rabbinim B'Shischa said like this. It says the Mekoshesh was Mechal Shabbos. Tosfos tells us, Targum Yonason tells us that he did it L'Shem Shemayim to teach Klal Yisrael that Shabbos is Chomer. So he says, what type of lesson is that? You want to teach Shabbos is Chomer? Go give shmuzin. I don't know, make vadin. Sit Klal Yisrael down. Maybe do a Hachana L'Shabbos program. Sing, dance. I don't teach them that Shabbos is Chashiv with alcohol, without alcohol, whatever the version is. Like saying, teach them, make a Shabbos parade, do something. You go Mechal Shabbos, you violate Shabbos in the most extreme and shocking manner, in a way that breaks it forever, because Chazal tell us, Ilu Yisrael Misham Shtei Shabbos is Miyadei in the Golem, they could have gone straight to Yisrael and stayed there forever. And according to many days in Chazal, this was the second Shabbos of their career. Rashi and Chumash, Machlekes Rashi and Chumash and the Ramban. If it was the Bashana Hasheni or B'Shabbos Hasheni, but Yech Shia, the first breaking the mold, being Mechal Shabbos when no one else did it. You tell me that's your chizik for Shabbos. So Rabbi B'Shishla said like this. He said what the Mekoshesh's lesson was, and again I have to say it in Yiddish because the way he said it is beautiful. He says, "Zu Mechalaleh Mois Yumas Binach HaMechutten and Zu Yismechu B'Malchuscha Binach Nishkin Mechutten." The Mekoshesh was showing them, if I'm nichla on the Mechalaleh Mois Yumas, if a Yid, even in our status after the Meraglim and after we're in a finster matziv, I'm still genuga Yid that I could be killed Mechalaleh Mois Yumas Binach HaMechutten to Yismechu B'Malchuscha. Very different than the Kotzke's take, meaning exactly the opposite. He told them, yeah, the stakes are high. You know why? Because I'm still a Yid no matter what. It's not changeable. It's not like I'm still a Yid, I'm still a Mechutten with Shabbos, and nobody can take that away from me. That's the Rabbeinu B'Shilcha's take on thing. Now, the Vartal that I once said before, it happens to be the Miriam said this over also, this is a story that I said before, I think I said it here once. The Miriam was sitting with a Bacher who was very dejected. The Bacher had done something bad, something, he felt he had no future in the world of Yeshiva, of Ger, wherever he was from, and he wanted to throw it all away. And the Miriam sat down with him and he said, you can't techlein in a Gemara, you could learn a Gemara. He says, yeah, he took out a Gemara Shabbos Kofi Tess, and he opened it up and said, line. And the Ger is a very thing, and the young man starts reading the Gemara, and it says, anybody who kol oina mein yesh merab b'chol koichai, afilu if he had a hearer of Avodah Zarah, a srach of Avodah Zarah, they let him get away with it. So he says, nu was shteit? So the Bacher tells him, so shteit as a mein yesh merab is a groise schus, and no matter how low you fell, the mein yesh merab rescue. So the Miriam says, gerech, da shteit, was euch shteit? Was noch steht? And Bacher draws a blank. It's doesn't know what to say. The Rebbe tells him, I'll tell you what else it says. It says that someone who had a hearer of Avodah Zarah could turn around tomorrow and be Oina Meini Yishmerav B'chol Kaichai. The same person that had a hearer of Avodah Zarah could turn around and be Oina Meini Yishmerav B'chol Kaichai. That's the same. That's Rabbinim Zvar. It's the same in Miriam. It's the same thing. Like to Mechalem Yumas Benach HaMechutten and to Yismach HaMelchus Chanish. It's the same. Like stam a funny thing. My kid goes to a very my son goes to a very intense yeshivish borderline Chassidish primary. And he came home and he tells me he's 3 years old. He took off his yarmulke and he says, I'm not a Yid, look, I'm not wearing a yarmulke. So I don't know why it triggered me. I said, no, not you're not a Yid, you're not wearing a yarmulke. You're a Yid who's not wearing a yarmulke. There's a difference. Now, of course it's lost on a 3-year-old, but there's a difference. You're not a Yid because you're not wearing a yarmulke. You're a Yid who's not wearing a yarmulke. That's the Rabbeinu B'Shishcha's Vart. That's the Miriam's Vart. It's a very shena understanding in what the Mekoshesh is. Like, what was his chizik that he gave Klal Yisrael? How was he the Rebbe of Klal Yisrael, so to speak, in a certain way? Is by showing them this lesson that no matter what, we're still something, we're still important. Now, in the details of the Mekoshesh and his Chillul Shabbos Lishma, so there's a lot of Sheina Verta. I don't know how much we'll get to, but let's try to cover some of it. Now, the first thing is as follows. There's a Marsha, and I think this is the starting point that we need to discuss. There's a Marsha and Baba Basra. Marsha is a kasha. It's a pasha kasha, straightforward kasha. The Marsha asks like this. He says, I don't understand. The Mekoshesh wanted to make a lesson. He wanted to teach Klal Yisrael. It says, "Come, Gavra de Beis Yosef brings the Targum Yonason, v'chula says as follows. And then he says his daughters, like the Gemara Basra tells us, his daughters, the Bnei Slavchad, when they came to request a Yerusha, they said, Avinu b'chetay meis, our father b'chetay meis, and Chazal darshan from this b'chetay meis, his personal chet. It was like a one-off. It didn't show a brokenness. It didn't show a total corruption. We're good. We're still, and v'halach haraya, that his children are still on, good. He didn't try to raid, like he was doing a good thing. Frekta Marsha as follows. He says, I don't understand. He says, the Welt asks. It's a Welt kasha, the Marsha says. Yesh shaylim b'zeh. He'ach chata be'eser Shabbos, k'dei leide be'ezim misa dan in Mechal Shabbos. How's that ois gehalten? Forget about the Rabbinim's question of was farasat muslish muznet. How's that ois gehalten? You're not allowed to Mechal Shabbos to teach a lesson. That's not how it goes. Zok Marshav yesh leimar. Why does he assume that it was ois gehalten? Because of Chazal, and we'll see, I should have really started with Gemara Shabbos, but if Chazal are giving him some sort of credit, and they're saying that, like Tosfos is saying from Targum Yonason, l'shem shemayim eschavna, meaning we're giving him some sort of asterisk, like even though he's a Russian, he was l'shem shemayim eschavna. What's l'shem shemayim eschavna is that? L'shem shemayim eschavna, you're doing an avera. So says the Marshav Yesh Lemer, I'll tell you, he says V'yesh Lemer Ule, you could say Kivan Shalei Tzarich LeMalacha Zu Elaleide Be'ezem Misa. He didn't need to do this malacha b'chlal. He only wanted to know which misa it would incur. Havale Malacha Shen Tzrich Legufa K'mei Choyfer Guma, like a bit Zilbashin's Psak. His Chillul Shabbos was not an echte Chillul Shabbos. It wasn't a real Chillul Shabbos. Hayosi was doing it. It's Malach Shen Tzricha L'Gufa. He didn't really mean to do a Malacha Shabbos. He just wanted to make a display. That's not called Mechil Shabbos and Kamei Chayfer Guma Vein Tzarech L'Afra Shu Patel Rav Shimon. And then he continued on, Miu Havade the Hayachayev Misa B'Dinei Adam Shlo Yadu HaEdim Shisurin. And this is a plea of the Gezach. He says Bevade he was Chayev Misa because the Edim can't know his intention. They don't know what his intention was, and the action, the Malacha that he did appears to be a regular Malacha. He's Chayev, but Afal Pikein, you want to know why he has an asterisk, why he's not a bad guy? It's because L'Shem Shemayin is Chaven, because it was Malacha Shen Tzricha L'Gufa. This is what he says. Fine, okay. He brings Taisus v'chulu. This is what the Marsha says. Now, so this as I said the Marsha. Now here's a fascinating deher. I think the first one to say is the Galant Rav, whose yard side is actually tonight, so it's a very bashert. I think it's that Galant Rav. There's been a lot of Rabbanim and Galants. I don't know, but if it's Rav Buxbaum, the Galant Rav, I think it's his yard side. I think it's the first one who says it, but other people say it after as follows. There's a Pliyadik Medrash, the way the Medrash brings this down. In the Yalkut Gershuni, it says like this. It says as follows: Shaulu Talmidim es Rabbi. The Talmidim asked Rabbi, Mekoshesh mi haya. Who was the Mekoshesh? Amalahem, he tells them, Ma asa. Which malacha did he do? Amalai Toilish haya. He was a Toilish. Amalahem aibezay Mekoshesh sut slavchad. Now it's a cryptic medrash. Now let's give the background to this medrash as follows. The Gemara in Shabbos on Daf Tzadik Vav tells an interesting conversation. The Gemara says like this. The Gemara brings three shittas. Amar Yehuda Amar Shmuel Mekoshesh Maver Arba Amas haya. The first sheet of what he did wrong is he was Maver Arba Amas. He carried things in the midbar of Arba Amas haya. Masnisatan a Toilish have. No, he ripped something out, and we saw the Targum Yonason said that version also. Rav Acha bar Yaakov Amar Ma'amar haya. He was gathering things up. My nafkamina. The Gemara brings nafkamina. Then the Gemara continues and it says Tanar Rabbanan Mekoshesh at Slavchad. Mekoshesh was Slavchad. V'cheinu Omer v'hi b'nei Yisrael b'midbar v'yimtzu ish. V'la'alanu Omer avinu meis b'midbar ma'alahal and Slavchad afkan Slavchad. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva brings some sort of Gzeir Shava b'midbar to tell us that the one who was talking about the Chil Shabbos was Slavchad, just like the B'nai Slavchad were referring to Slavchad, their father, when they said he died. So Amalei Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseir. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseir says a very harsh criticism of Rabbi Akiva. He says as follows: Akiva, ben kachu ben kachat azalit in asadin. You're in trouble no matter how you slice this. Why? Im kidvarecha, if you're correct that he's Slavchad, hatayra kisisai va'ata megala isai. The Torah covered his identity. The Torah put Slavchad in witness protection. It didn't say who he is. And you're just outing him like this and saying his name is Slavchad, va'ata megaleo isai. V'im lav ata moitzi shemra alayse tzadik. And if not, you stam moitzi laz alayse tzadik. One way or the other, you're doing the wrong thing. Either you're taking the wrong guy and you're making him the villain over here, or you're being megala asay that the Gemara didn't want to be megala. Now, here's the Galant Rav Zvar. Zakta as follows. He says, here's what the Medrash says. Shaulu Talmid, and one more Nekudav. We need one more Nekudav here. There's something in the Achronim, the Divrei Chaim, Ala Torah in Parshas Vayetze, and other Achronim in other contexts, and it's a big need then if this is true or not. Yeah, true. If this is the consensus of the Poskim or not. The Divrei Chaim says like this, that the din of Melachas Machsheves was not Nemar on carrying Maver Dalad Amas. Maver Dalad Amas is not a pasuk. There's no pasuk that says Zasad carry Dalad Amas. It's Halachah Mishmei Sinai. And the Yosef Halachah Mishmei Sinai, the din of Melachas Machsheves, which is only gesagt on Melachas Menat Torah, is not gesagt on this Melacha. That's what the Divrei Chaim says. Other Achanim say it also. So says the Galant Rav as follows. Here's the Medrash. The Medrash says, Shalu Talmidim es Rabbi Mekoshesh mi haya. Who was he? Meaning, there was a desire to know who the Mekoshesh was. There must have been some sort of Messiah floating around. The Rakiva had already said something. Hagamdi was rebuke, and other Tanoim felt he shouldn't say it. But people knew that there was something to talk about over here, who the Mekoshesh was. The L'Shem Shemayim aspect, there was a backstory to the Mekoshesh that people wanted to know about. So Shaul Talmidim es Rabbi Mekoshesh mi haya. Amlahem ma asa. He says, which Messiah, which tradition from the Gemara and Shabbos and Tzadik Vav Med Aleph are you holding with? Which malacha did he do? What did he do wrong? Amrulay, they told him Toilish haya. He was a Toilish. Now Toilish, if he did it Lishma, to teach Klal Yisrael not to Melachas Shabbos, it's a Malacha Shen Tzricha L'Gufa, like the Marsha says. And it wouldn't have been really a Malacha, and he wouldn't have been Chayim. He says, oh, okay, you have an ayin tay for him? You have an example of something where it could be a Malacha Shen Tzricha L'Gufa? Now I can out him, I can tell you it's Slavchad. Meaning, if you know that he did a Malacha that could be a Malacha Shen Tzricha L'Gufa, like the Marsha says, and we could give him the proper asterisks and say that he really wasn't such a terrible guy, he wasn't really Melachas Shabbos, it was Lishma, it was Malacha Shen Tzricha L'Gufa, then I can tell you his name. This is what the Galant Rav said, and I think it's a very nice teher in Slavchad. Now, there's a lot of ink has been spilled to debate if that's really so. Is there really no Melachas Machsheves on Maver Dalad Amas and etc.? Fine. What do you say? I think Ma'amar's Melachas Deraisa. It's in the Torah. Ma'amar would have the Torah Melachas Machsheves. I mean, why they choose this one? No, one or two. One of the other. It couldn't have been Maver Dalad. It could have been anything. Yeah, that could have been Ma'amar also. But in any case, it's a very shade of the hair in the Medrash. Now, the Chazal in so many different places mention the Mekoshesh as like as a precedent-setting event. Meaning it was a very, precedent-setting event. L'mashal, Lagabe Hasra. There's a halacha, there's a machlekes Tanoim in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Daf Pei, it's a Gemara in Makkas also. When you give Hasra, you have to say which Misa you're going to get. Now the Mandama that says you have to get which Misa, he learns, so the Gemara says like this, the Mandama that says you don't need to know which Misa, he learns from the Mekoshesh. Because the Mekoshesh, Chazal tells, got Hasra, even though his Misa didn't become clear till later, Moshe Rabbeinu had to imprison him, put him in prison, lock him up, go talk to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and get the Misa for him, right? So the Mekoshesh is the Makar. The Manda Amar that you need to give Hasra specifically, Mekoshesh was Hira Shal Hisa, Rabbi Yehuda says, meaning there's another Gemara that's reckoning with the Mekoshesh's story and how it's relevant. Now, Stam, as an asterisk, Mamash as an aside, and then I want to move on to one more important detail, cute detail. As an asterisk, according to the Marsha is trying to address that what the asterisk was, that he was, Malachish and Tzrich Legufa. The problem is, the Marsha raises this himself, I shouldn't really be Chayiv Misas Bezdin, right? Malachish and Tzrich Legufa is not Chayiv Misas Bezdin. So Marsha says, nobody, they couldn't have known, Bezdin couldn't have known where his heart was at. Now, it's a loosely related question. The Minchas Elazar in Chelik Aleph and Shuvi Yitches, B'Shulei HaYiri, he has a fascinating question. He wants to know as follows. B'nidin shenistapakti zekvar, I had a shayla, an old standing shayla, says, "Be'echad sheyatzel lahareg al pi Sanhedrin." Someone who's being taken out to be killed by the Sanhedrin. Kedin Torah, imutal levrayach im yachal hatzalatz misasan, im gamalav mitzvah sheyaniach v'yitin atzma l'kayim b'din reges bezdin. The guy is being taken out. He has the opportunity to make a break for it. He could run. Is he allowed to run? Is he mechuyev to run? Or does he have to shtaltu to Bezdin's misa? Then he says, let me add another layer to this. Let's say he knows he's not guilty. Bezdin has the wrong man. There's Eidim, it's the wrong man. Bezdin's got the wrong man. Is he mechuyev al tzvachai behem to try to make a run for it? Or is he supposed to be makabel it by Inish on himself? Now the Minchas Elazar in his Gainis brings very cute rice. There's a famous Rashi in Sanhedrin, Daf Mem and Aleph. Mem Dalet and Beis, I think. Or Mem and Beis. Long story with Shimon ben Shetach's son that comes from Yerushalmi, who was put to death unjustly, and he made an announcement before his death. He said, if I'm guilty, then my misa should not be a kapara. So you see that he didn't shtal to the misa, so yes, maybe why didn't he try to run away? Maybe he couldn't, v'chulu. But it just brought to mind, loosely connected, the Mekoshesh, in his own mind, might have been saying, I'm not mechuyev misa. Now, it's hard to say that because Moshe Rabbeinu asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu paskin. So it's not like a bezdin. So it's not hard to say. It's impossible to say that the Mekoshesh wasn't mechuyev misa. The Eze Tam Sheyeh, he was mechuyev misa. Either it's Chillul Hashem, the Chillul Hashem Shabai, or I'll tack it to set the example I've seen in some svarim that say he used the Mekoshesh's desire was kaviyach to be meiser nefesh, to teach Klal Yisrael the lesson. HaKadosh Baruch Hu paskin that he should be meiser nefesh. Now, in any case, it's just tangentially related. Minchas Elazar in the end of Chelik Aleph, in the last tshuva, he brings a few more rayas to it. So if you're interested in the Shaila, Ayin Sham, it's a cute chap that the Minchas Elazar has. Now, there's another fascinating vertel that's gezakt. That's as follows. There's a Gemara in Shabbos, and we spoke about this today earlier. The Gemara says like this: Tanar Rabbanan, Ma'aseh b'chased echad. It's a Gemara in Daf Kuf Nun. So like this: Ma'aseh b'chased echad, shenifritzu loy peretz b'tech sadeu. There was a break in his fence on his field. B'tech sadeu v'nimlach alei l'gaydra. And it sounds like on Shabbos he decided, and there's different nuschayos in Chazal about this. Some say he started, some say he thought about it on Shabbos, some say he started before Shabbos and he stopped on Shabbos. And he was thinking about fixing it on Shabbos. He stopped himself, he caught himself, and he didn't fix it. And from here was the parnasa of his family, and v'chulu. So there's a marvelous story that the Gemara says about a chassid who was starting to be Mechal Shabbos, maybe only b'machshava, he caught himself and he stopped himself and he wasn't Mechal Shabbos. Zakt Chida, and he's not the only one to say it, but Zakt various kadmainim. I saw the Ramami Panu, the Ramami Panu brings down that this chassid, Maaseh b'chassid echad, who tried to be Mechal Shabbos, was a gilgul of the Mekoshesh, who came to be Mechaper on the Mekoshesh's Avera. Hayos the Mekoshesh was not a full Rasha. He was given another chance of mechaper it, and the way the Ramam Mifano says you could live your whole life, and if you don't get to the thing that you're supposed to get to, you're going to come back again and again. So the Mekoshesh was coming back to be mechaper on the Aveira that he did of Mechal Shabbos, and this was his opportunity. Now, how is he mechaper it? Because he had an opportunity to be Mechal Shabbos. He thought to be Mechal Shabbos, and he caught himself and he controlled himself. Now, what's the remez in this Gemara? The Chasam Sofer brings up B'Shem Darizal that the remez is that it says, when he finished, he was zachav also b'sadeu tzlaf, tevis tzlafchad hu tzlafchad, one tzlaf. The tzlaf is tzlafchad. Heyosi was zeiche to be mechaper as avera. The simon that the Gemara gives to this is tzlafchad. They grew to he was zeiche to have a tzlafchad to prove to show the kapara of averis, and again to secretly reveal his name, just like the Gemara in Shabbos where Akiva secretly reveals his name. Over here again in this Gemara in Shabbos, in Kuf Nun, you see like a hint. referring to his name. Now, I saw an interesting knech. I don't know who the sefer is, from Nachlas Yaakov. It says the Gemara in Be'ah, Nefchel Chasam Be'ah says Shleisha Azin Heim. There are three things that are considered Azin. Yisrael are Azin Sheba Umos. Kelev is Az Sheba in the animal world. And Slaf is Bilonis. Now, Azin by an Elon probably just means it grows very quickly. Right? It's rambunctious. Like it's a weed. Like it grows very quickly. Slaf Echad. So it grows quickly. Rashi says, like Rashi, Afanart in Be'ah says, La Yadati Ma Azus Shalai. It's hard to explain what azus is by its semeach. Like an animal could have azus, a human could have azus. Well, like where does azus shtal by its semeach? So says the sefer Nachas Yaakov, and I think it's an old sefer, 200-300-year-old sefer. It says Lapid Dever Arizal Yuvan. These the Gemara in Shabbos. The Torah Kedusha Kisasav LePirsim Mishmei Shalom Mekoshesh. The Gemara tells us that the Torah was mechasa, the name of the Mekoshesh. It covered him up, right? Didn't say that his name was Slafchad. Ve'ilan slaf shegadu b'sadei shaleisi chassid hu heiz v'gilu l'chol shetzlaf chadu ha'mekoshesh v'nis gagul b'al il metakin chatay. The tzlaf was a mechutzif like a rakiva. The tzlaf showed that this was the Mekoshesh. The tzlaf said, "Here, I'll wink, wink, nod, nod. Like here, I'll tell you who the Mekoshesh was by showing you who the tzlaf is." Now, it's interesting is that it's like another knech that's different from what I'm saying. Is that the Gemara says the Ma'aseh b'chassid echad shnifritza. The Gemara in Tur and Daf Tevzav tells us that anytime it says Ma'aseh b'chassid echad, it's either Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava or Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi. Those are the two man namrim that it could mean chassid echad. So you could say the reason why Chazal left it as a suffix and they weren't megale who the chassid was in Yana Gemara is because the Torah kisasav legileim v'yosei Mekoshesh. In order to continue to protect the Mekoshesh's identity, we didn't say who the Mekoshesh is in the Torah, and also Chazal don't ever say who Chassid Echad is, because since they knew that the Chassid Echad through this story with the tzlaf was the kapara for the Gilgul for the Mekoshesh, they left it vague. B'dafka left it opaque. Who the Chassid Echad is, meaning what I have to say, it's maybe him, maybe him. Tell us who it is. Again, they were keeping with the tradition of protecting the identity of tzlafchad, of the Mekoshesh, because he was only a quasi bad guy. He wasn't such a bad guy. He did an important lesson. He did something important for Klal Yisrael. Now, interestingly, and I saw this as an extra knech, that they say, it's very gishmak, why the Gemara in Shabbos Daf Chav Hey tells us about Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi as follows. It says, Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi, kachayim in Hagash or Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi, this was the minhag of Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi, Erev Shabbos, mevin le arevim le'echam, and they would bring him a basket, a bucket full of hot water, v'roichetz panav yadav v'raglav, he'd wash his hands and face, and v'yoshev b'sadinim and he would sit with his, frak with tzitzis, and he looked like a Malach Hashem Tzavakas. I don't know how many other Tanaim are described, their Shabbos rituals described in that manner. So, Yehuda bar Eloi again is displaying for us a meridik chavivas for Shabbos, because he's the chassid from the story, he's Tzlafchad, he's the Aver Lishma, he's all with the ideal of teaching Klal Yisrael the Chaymer Advarim and the seriousness and the beauty of Shabbos. So never really, be Michal Shabbos even then, and certainly not now. I think we'll hold it here. Good Shabbos.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.